This lecture wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from BMO Private Bank. You might know them locally under their former name of Harris Bank. We very much appreciate their sponsorship and making it possible for us to bring these kind of lectures to the museum. Today's lecture about the Christmas traditions of the White House will be presented by Mary Seeley. And Mary happens to be a Floridian. She could drive here instead of fly here, like so many of our lecturers have to do. And she and her husband Ron are here today. They've been longtime collectors of Christmas memorabilia connected with the White House. And she's done quite a lot of work over the last few decades to become an expert in this subject. So we're delighted to have her here today. She graduated with her master's in history from the University of Nebraska, so she is an historian by training. And as I said, she lives right here in Tampa. She, by the way, has a great website. It's White House Holidays, did you tell me, Mary, of .com. You can find this really interesting Christmas ornaments, molded glass, blown glass, stamped metal, Christmas ornaments that, and many of them are connected with, or have a patriotic theme. I think you'll find those ornaments very interesting if you're interested in that kind of thing. So please give that a look at some point during the Christmas holidays. In fact, we're lucky to have Mary at all because this is her busiest time of year. So to get her to abandon her responsibilities with her website and come here to do a lecture was a real treat for us. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mary Seeley to the annual Christmas lecture at Whitehall.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, John. Yesterday I came here a little bit earlier so I could get my bearings of this place, and it is a beautiful facility that you have here. I know that you enjoy coming many times during the year, and so I was really happy to learn about the history of Whitehall and being here. So I was telling John over lunch today that it is a real busy time for me, but when Allison called and asked me to speak on Christmas of the Presidents during the Gilded Age, I had to give it second thought. I had turned someone else down. And it was so compelling to me to think about how the presidents celebrated Christmas that I said that I would. My husband encouraged me to expand outside the parameters of my book, which is from Calvin Coolidge to George W. Bush. But I thought it would really be an interesting journey to go back through the earlier presidents. And he said that he would help me, so today he is helping me. He is going to forward the presentation on the PowerPoint, so you'll be able to see the pictures as we go along. And so today we're going to do a show and tell on how the presidents from the Civil War through the Great Depression, from Abraham Lincoln through Calvin Coolidge, celebrated Christmas at the White House. So if you'll come with me, come with us, from Whitehall to the White House, we will see how that works. It was very interesting conclusion to find that many of the traditions that we celebrate today had their origins in the Gilded Age of America. And the number of firsts was just incredible. Christmas first became a federal holiday in 1870. And the first Christmas card was created in London in 1843 for Sir Henry Cole. And he sent this Christmas card in place of his usual Christmas letter. In 1875, Louis Prang published the first Christmas card in America. And his designs we will showcase throughout the rest of the presentation. Christmas trees were sold commercially in the 1850s, and in 1889, the first Christmas tree was decorated in the White House. Now, prior to the Gilded Age, Christmas was a normal workday for most people. The presidents held cabinet meetings, they did business as usual, but they did allow a little time to have a special Christmas dinner with turkey and all the trimmings. And all during the 19th century, it was not Christmas, but New Year's that made holiday headlines. Before the White House was even built, the tradition of hosting a New Year's Day reception was started by George Washington. And the New York Times described the New Year's Day reception of President and Mrs. Lincoln this way. The White House was thrown open at 12 o'clock. The cabinet members, the diplomatic corps, the judges of the Supreme Court, the Army and Navy officers paid compliments of the season to the president and his wife. At 1 o'clock, the citizens at large were presented. The Marine Band discoursed excellent music, and no less than 5,000 people gained admittance to the reception. So it was that Abraham Lincoln had shaken thousands of hands before making history on January 1st, 1863, when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And his hand was so swollen that he made the comment, "The signature looks a little tremulous, as my hand was tired, but my resolution was firm." Christmas for the Lincoln family was overshadowed by military matters. And during their first Christmas of the war, both President and Mrs. Lincoln reviewed the troops and visited wounded soldiers in the hospital regularly. Mrs. Lincoln was said to be the first First Lady to be actively engaged in public activities outside the White House. She arranged flowers, she read books, she helped serve meals for the soldiers and cared for them at both the Campbell and Douglas hospitals. She personally raised $1,000 for Christmas dinners and also donated a similar amount for oranges and lemons when she heard that there was a threat of scurvy among the troops. Tad Lincoln was also very much impressed with the horrors of war. He had visited the soldiers with his father, and he wanted to send them books that he had received as gifts to the soldiers. And his father said, "Yes, my son, send a big box, and ask Mother for plenty of warm things, and tell Daniel to pack all the good eatables that he can, and let him mark the box from Tad Lincoln." Wanting to cheer up the soldiers, President Lincoln commissioned cartoon artist Thomas Nast to illustrate Santa Claus handing out gifts to Union troops. Nast depicted him as bearded and plump, the image we usually think of Santa Claus today. Santa in Camp appeared on the cover of Harper's Weekly, January 3rd, 1863. Tad and Willie were the first little children, to live in the White House for some time. And they were normal boys. They could get into a lot of mischief. But soon after the Lincolns had their first Christmas in the White House, both of the boys came down with typhoid fever, and Willie died in February. After that, Christmas presents given among the Lincoln family were probably purchased by the president and Tad at Strunt's toy store, which was located near the White House. Wooden toys and toy soldiers were some of the items that Lincoln purchased for his son, and he said, "I want to give him all the toys that I did not receive and all the toys that I would have given to the boy that went away." The most significant fact associated with Abraham Lincoln comes from his final Christmas in 1864. On December 22nd, General Sherman sent a telegram to the president with the following message: "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah, with 150 heavy guns, plenty of ammunition, and about 25,000 bales of cotton." The capture of Savannah by Union troops marked the end of Sherman's march to the sea, when his forces cut a swath of destruction across Georgia, demoralizing the heart of the Confederacy. Lincoln's reply on December 26th of that year was heartfelt. He said, "Many, many thanks for the Christmas gift." 112 days after Sherman took Savannah, President Lincoln was dead, and Andrew Johnson became president, and he was a workaholic. He probably would not have noticed any handcrafted Christmas greetings with silk fringe and tassels that appeared during his era. His main interest was politics, and he granted 4 amnesty proclamations to the South following the Civil War. His last amnesty proclamation was on Christmas Day in 1868, which provided a full pardon and amnesty for the offense of treason against the United States and granted restoration of all rights, privileges, and immunities under the Constitution. What a wonderful gift it was to Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, to have this amnesty for him, this pardon for him. President Johnson often took carriage rides after a stressful day of politics. And so in 2001, the White House Historical Association honored his administration with this very popular Christmas ornament featuring President and Mrs. Johnson taking a carriage ride with the family. Unlike the most invisible Eliza Johnson, who participated in only 2 official events in 4 years, Julia Dent Grant constantly was out and about. At Christmas time, the asylums, the orphanages, and hospitals received generous donations from the Grants, often in the form of candy and fruit. Toy merchants and jewelers also counted on Mrs. Grant's generosity. She bought very freely for children and often led a parade of them through their stores, and they enjoyed all of the gifts that were given to them. There was a time when General Grant had to pawn his own pocket watch to buy gifts for his family at Christmas time. So the Grants had come a long way, and in 1870 he had the authority to first declare Christmas a legal holiday in America. Now, as the Gilded Age began to blossom in America, men and women of society became very well-mannered and self-conscious as they competed for the attention of royal families around the world. And on December 23rd, 1874, President and Mrs. Grant entertained the first foreign head of state in White House history. And their royal guest was King of the Sandwich Islands, also known as Hawaii. Dinners were given by the Grants were very elaborate. Sometimes they would have as many as 29 courses and would take from 2 to 3 or even more hours. The East Room was decorated magnificently, and in the Green Room there was a life-size picture of General Grant on horseback, which had been painted and preserved as the President as a Christmas gift to him. In 1875, Louis Prang, a Prussian immigrant, began publishing the first Christmas cards in America and earned the title the father of the American Christmas card. Prang's high-quality cards were printed with 8 colors, up to 32 colors to achieve the perfection that he wanted, making them very beautiful, but also very costly. The popularity of Prang's Christmas cards were almost immediate. His cards were considered a work of art. They had distinctive coloring, lettering, and cardstock. And by 1881, he was printing 5 million cards a year, with illustrations of flowers and birds and subjects having little to do with Christmas. His later cards did feature more traditional holiday designs. But because of the cost, Prang cards were forced into closure in 1890 and were replaced with penny postcards from Germany. With the American Christmas cards in their infancy, we presume that President and Mrs. Hayes did not send Christmas cards. But there was rumor from an article that had been written that Louis Prang himself sent President and Mrs. Hayes a Christmas card, but his presidential home has yet to find it. Hayes was well known as a prolific writer before, during, and after his presidency. He also kept a diary until he was 70 years old. And on December 26, he described how he spent Christmas. Our visit to New York, the 21st and 24th, was a most happy one. The Union League reception on the 22nd, the American Museum of Natural History opening, and the New England dinner, all enjoyable. Christmas, the presents to the children made them and their parents equally happy. The Hayes had 8 children, 1 girl and 7 boys. And on Christmas 1880, they celebrated in the White House Library. The presents were kept in the Red Room, and the children would run and get a gaily wrapped present and bring it to the president, who would take his good-natured time to distribute the gifts to the right recipient. Fannie Hayes received a large dollhouse made by the White House carpenter during her first Christmas at the White House. Now, the highlight of the Hayes' first holiday season was a celebration of their silver wedding anniversary, including a lavish reenactment of their 1852 wedding ceremony. The East Room was decorated with white flowers and a large white wedding ball, beneath which the couple repeated their vows. They also exchanged these gold coins, portrait cameos, as their wedding gift to one another before a large crowd on December 30th, and then this was followed by a New Year's party on December 31st, and then the big reception on New Year's Day. Lucy Hayes was a great lover of the holiday season. She invited the staff members to help them celebrate on Christmas morning and then to share Thanksgiving dinner with them as well. Lucy was known for her sing-alongs, and so there was probably a lot of Christmas carols sung in the White House. She was also dubbed Lemonade Lucy, and at the request of her husband, she banned spirits in the White House, where water flowed like wine at these presidential receptions. James Garfield, the leading Republican in the House of Representatives, spent 18 Christmases in Congress before he was elected President of the United States by less than 2,000 votes, the smallest margin ever recorded in a presidential election. President-elect Garfield spent Christmas 1880 at his Lawnfield estate in Ohio, poring over the inaugural addresses of previous presidents, and did not finish writing his own until right before his own inauguration. On Christmas Day, President-elect Garfield took the time to sign his daughter Molly's autograph book and dated it December 25th, 1880. Other signers of the book also included Lucretia Garfield, her mother, and Tad Lincoln. President Garfield never really had a chance to celebrate Christmas in the White House himself because he died of an assassin's bullet in September. Chester A. Arthur, he was sworn in upon Garfield's death. He was a widower, and he was in no hurry to move into that big White House. Black crape shrouded the north portico all during the fall, and on December 22nd, this was declared a national day of mourning for President Garfield. The next Christmas, it was announced that President Arthur had been diagnosed with Bright's disease, and he would not seek re-election. In 1883, there were 4 Christmas clubs were formed in Washington for the purpose of feeding needy youngsters. The president of District 2 Club was none other than Nellie Arthur, the daughter of Chester A. Arthur. And so plants and evergreens from the White House were loaned for this event. And so from the same executive mansion, the small president of the club escorted the big president of the republic as her guest. And 500 children were fed at the Christmas club. President Arthur's last Christmas was celebrated in Washington. He received many gifts, including a hammered silver button hook and boxes of premium cigars. He gave his servants a shiny $5 gold piece. Now, Grover Cleveland, you may remember, had a split administration with Benjamin Harrison sandwiched in between. When Cleveland was first elected president in 1885, he hardly ever stopped working. He did, however, take time off for his wedding in 1886 to 22-year-old Frances Folsom. This event was commemorated in a White House ornament by the White House Historical Association in 2007 with a depiction of the ceremony reproduced from this 1886 engraving. Young Mrs. Cleveland was often seen out Christmas shopping, and she was always an encourager to the tired clerks. She probably identified with them being so young. The president worked Christmas morning before taking off to their farm for Christmas dinner. President Cleveland personally addressed envelopes to the staff each containing a gift of cash. Now, although there was no Christmas tree during the first administration of Grover Cleveland, the addition of children changed that in their second term. A Christmas tree was decorated in 1895, complete with the first electric lights hung on a tree in the White House. And under the tree was a miniature White House dollhouse for Esther, the only daughter of a president to be born in the White House. Frances Cleveland's main activity was her work with the Christmas charities in Washington. She volunteered her time to wrap presents and distribute them to needy children. No previous First Lady had taken such an active part as Mrs. Cleveland had in volunteer work, and she set a tradition of good works for subsequent First Ladies. This engraved White House Christmas card reveals the type of a card of a Gilded Age president that they might have sent as a Christmas card, or at least given with their Christmas gifts. The very first Christmas tree inside the White House was put up for the joy of the president's immediate family in 1889 during the administration of Benjamin Harrison. Harrison was a doting grandfather, and he just went to great lengths to amuse his grandchildren, even to removing the dignity of the office of the presidency and helping the White House gardener put up the tree. He said, "We shall have an old-fashioned Christmas tree for the grandchildren upstairs, and I shall be their Santa Claus myself." Caroline Harrison was an artist, and she was instrumental in planning how the tree would be adorned with glass ornaments, toy soldiers, garland, and lit candles. Unfortunately, there is no picture of that first Christmas tree in the White House, according to the presidential home. This silhouette is what they provided. It's a cutout showing President and Mrs. Harrison decorating the tree, but it was created for a 1941 Christmas card. On Christmas morning, the tooting of a horn was a signal for the Christmas celebration to begin. And so the whole Harrison household was led into the second floor oval room by young Benjamin Harrison, his grandson, and Mary McGee. Beside the presents, there was candy and fruit given to the family and staff. The president presented turkeys and gloves to his employees. In 1879, Mrs. Harrison painted this pillow for their daughter, Mary Scott Harrison. And for some reason, she painted her own initials backwards. What began as a Harrison gathering became a national tradition. And over the years, the White House tree has reflected both the times and the tastes of the first family. And so, again, the White House Historical Association, inspired by the Harrison's Victorian tree, tried to capture the essence of that first Christmas tree in the White House with a 24-karat gold-finished ornament. Christmas was bittersweet for President and Mrs. McKinley. The couple's first daughter, Catherine, was born on Christmas Day in 1871. She passed away 4 years later. Their second daughter, Ida, was born in 1873 and passed away at 4 months of age. With their deaths, Mrs. McKinley suffered a breakdown that she never truly recovered from. And so the 4 Christmas celebrations during the McKinley years were quiet gatherings, usually centered around dinner with the president's brother and his family. There was very little merrymaking because of the absence of children and due to Mrs. McKinley's poor health. On Christmas Day, the president would try to take his wife on a carriage ride throughout the city parks where they could be alone. The McKinleys were very popular with the American people, and at Christmas time they were flooded with gifts, gift baskets and flowers and parcels. Useful gifts were distributed to the staff. Liquor was returned, and perishables were dumped. The White House staff always received personal gifts from Mrs. McKinley. Sometimes they would be hand-knit by her, or if she was well enough to go out and purchase a gift for them. Plump turkeys were distributed to the married men. And as a special gift, the president signed a copy of his book, Speeches and Addresses, on December 25th, 1900. At the turn of the century, the McKinleys began an era of musicales in the East Room. The tradition again was captured by the White House Historical Association, and their 2010 ornament featured the Marine Band playing in the snow-covered driveway of the north portico on the front of the ornament, and on the back side was the Army-Navy reception in 1900. And this is the first time the White House Historical ornament had equally beautiful paintings on the front and the back. Usually it was just gold on the back. It was just plain. But this is a very popular and a very beautiful ornament in 2010. While elected to a second term as president, McKinley never lived to celebrate another Christmas in the White House. He was a victim of the third assassination in just 36 years. And at that very moment, Ida's health and safety was his only concern. He said, "My wife, be careful how you tell her, oh, be careful." He died 8 days later, and she lived 6 more Christmases before she passed away and was buried to her very devoted husband. Now, because of the period of mourning following President McKinley's death, the Theodore Roosevelt family did not have a social season, their first Christmas in their White House. It was time of renovation of the mansion. They did not even have a Christmas tree for their 6 children, a dog, a cat, a calico pony, and a pet bird. They did, however, host family dinners for about 30 to 40 guests. But no president ever enjoyed Christmas like Theodore Roosevelt did. He could hardly wait for Christmas to come every year. At 7 o'clock in the morning, all the children and Jack the dog would bound into their parents' bedroom to claim the gifts of their stockings that were hung on the fireplace. And then this Thomas Nast cartoon, Happy Santa Claus at the White House, celebrated Theodore Roosevelt's delight in his children's Christmas. After a hearty breakfast on Christmas Day, the family would move to the library, where each child had a table full of larger gifts. And the president just reveled in the joy on his children's face when the library doors were thrown open and there was Christmas Toyland. Beginning with the Harrisons, it was customary to have a Christmas tree in the White House. But that tradition did not set well with the ardent conservationist Theodore Roosevelt. He thought that the cutting down of trees for a Christmas tree was one of the most blatant examples of deforestation. So Roosevelt refused to display a Christmas tree in the White House, fearing that it would send the wrong message to the public and it would be fodder for his political opponents. So after a treeless first Christmas, Roosevelt's 2 young boys, Archie and Quentin, cut down a Christmas tree on the White House grounds, smuggled it into the closet of the room where the family opened gifts, and the boys hung gifts on the tree for their parents on the branches. They enlisted the help of one of the electricians in decorating it with tiny lights and wiring it to a switch outside of the closet. And so on Christmas morning, while the family opened gifts, Archie surprised his family by opening this closet door and throwing on the switch. And while he was amused by his boys' ingenuity, the president, nevertheless, took them to the forestry chief to explain to them the negative effects of cutting down trees for Christmas. And to the president's surprise, Gifford Pinchot explained that, sometimes cutting down larger trees was good for the forest because it allowed the smaller trees to get the sunlight to help them to grow and to flourish. So in the following years, the family visited the tree in the closet. That was one of their rituals of the holiday, but they did keep this fact as much from the press as they could. A pen and ink drawing published in 1901 inspired the design of the 2011 official White House ornament. As Santa approaches the president's house with an overflowing bag of toys on his back for the large family of the Roosevelts, he said, "I hear there are some children in the White House this year." And so on the back of the ornament is a picture of the family looking at the tree, and on the front is a picture of Santa Claus. And many people were surprised that Santa made it to the White House historical ornament, but it did, whether they liked it or not, and that was the reason for the children. Now today there is a party for the diplomatic children held in the White House with some type of entertainment. It might be Big Bird or something like that. But the first party of its kind was conceived by Edith Roosevelt. The day after Christmas in 1903, 550 children arrived at the White House. They met the First Lady at 4:30 and then were ushered into the East Room, where there was a vaudeville act performed on stage for about an hour. Then the Marine Band played, and the children marched into the State Dining Room for supper, while the East Room was cleared so that they could have a dance until 6:30. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe began to recognize America's new military and economic power. And for Roosevelt, the prestige of the United States among the nations rested not only on the substance of his policies, but also on the style that he and Edith set at the White House. Beginning with the Theodore Roosevelt's, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue became the best address, and its receptions, musicals, and dinners became the most sought-after social invitation in the country. Many historians have likened jovial William Taft to Santa Claus himself. The large Ohioan was warm, jovial, and a good man, as seen in the number of Christmas gifts that he gave out during his time in office. The president believed more in the act of giving rather than in the value of the gift itself, and he didn't limit his gifts to just family and friends. Some of his Christmas lists climbed into the hundreds, and he always gave a Christmas card with his gift, causing his aides to scramble to find more Christmas cards as his list grew. President Taft usually devoted several days to Christmas shopping himself, and among his favorite items to purchase were books and jewelry. And in each one of his books, he would write a sentiment, which of course made that gift even more valuable. For later years anyway, and the president gave gifts to all of his White House clerks. He sent a turkey to the married employees. Usually 100 turkeys would cost him between $350 to $400. And then he would give a personal gift to each of the Secret Service men who had been assigned to his to protect him. Now the Tafts were the first family to display the White House Christmas tree in the Blue Room, where it is today. And it was especially nice for the officials and the citizenry to see the tree as they passed through the house on the New Year's Day reception in 1910. Currently, the White House Historical Association has honored the Taft administration with their 2012 ornament featuring President and Mrs. Taft riding in the back seat of his touring car. Replacing the horse and carriage of previous years, President Taft introduced the automobile to White House transportation in 1909. He was never happier than speeding through the countryside with the wind in his hair. In 1913, the country got its first taste of a national spirit at Christmas. Woodrow Wilson requested a community Christmas tree be placed at the U.S. Capitol. And so a 40-foot Norway spruce was located on the East Front Plaza and was decorated with red, white, and blue electric lights. On Christmas Eve, a crowd of 20,000 people gathered to celebrate a civic Christmas. Visitors enjoyed the Marine Band, a 1,000-voice choir, nativity scenes, and a lighted placard with the inspiration, "Peace on earth, goodwill toward men." The tradition resumed again the following year, but ended in 1915 because of a lack of funds. And then nearly 50 years later, a Christmas tree was placed in Statuary Hall. In 1964, a tree was planted on the west front lawn of the Capitol. And every year, the Capitol Christmas tree is lit by the Speaker of the House. Within 8 months of his first Christmas, President Wilson had given 2 of his daughters away by marriage, and his wife passed away in August of 1914. He was very lonely and depressed without her. And so President Wilson met and married Edith Bowling Galt on December 18, 1915, in a very un-Christmas-like setting. The bride wore black velvet and carried a bouquet of orchids and lily of the valley. The Wilsons honeymooned at the homestead in West Virginia, and it was the first time that a president of the United States was not in residence at the White House during the holiday season. President and Mrs. Wilson also spent Christmas 1918 away when they visited the U.S. troops in France. He was the first president to travel overseas during his term of office. On December 22nd, they visited soldiers in the hospital and reviewed the troops in the field. On the 23rd and the 24th, the president was busy with official business, but he managed to slip away and buy some Christmas gifts in Paris. On Christmas evening, Christmas Eve, the Wilsons left for General Pershing's headquarters by train provided by the President of France. There was no heat in the sleeping car, and it was almost like cold as a vault. The living conditions of the United States troops were deplorable. Mud, snow, and ice surrounded their temporary shacks where they lived. But the lonely soldiers decorated with a few greens and some red paper, trying to bring Christmas cheer to the President of the United States. And they enjoyed a traditional Christmas American dinner of turkey, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. It was a merry meal with good stories and high spirits before they had to say goodbye to the troops. Warren Harding would only live to see 2 Christmas seasons after being elected the 29th President of the United States. In 1921, the Hardings were able to escape the pressures of Washington by going to North Carolina. His second and his last presidential Christmas was spent in Washington. He wanted to go visit with friends and family in Ohio, but his wife had collapsed from kidney failure in September and was confined to a wheelchair. And then there was a series of threatening letters that arrived at the White House prior to Christmas. And Mrs. Harding was afraid to stay there. She wanted to be away from the White House. So Ned McLean, the owner of the Washington Post, invited them to his home on I Street for Christmas. Both of the wives were friends, and so that made it cordial. As the president left at 2 a.m., he remarked, "I'm very grateful to my assassin for a very pleasant Christmas day." He had not worried at all. In 1923, Harding was photographed buying Christmas seals from a young girl suffering from tuberculosis. That summer, President and Mrs. Harding took a tour of the western states, and during that trip, he became ill from food poisoning and died of an apparent heart attack in San Francisco. Consequently, he would not be able to use those Christmas seals he had purchased for his White House Christmas cards. I do not know if Calvin Coolidge sent a Christmas card as president, but as governor, he sent this card featuring the coat of arms of the state of Massachusetts. Now, while it was Woodrow Wilson who started the tradition of having the Capitol Christmas tree, it was Calvin Coolidge who started the tradition of lighting the first national Christmas tree on the ellipse near the White House. And this custom has continued with every president giving a speech and lighting the tree since 1923, and will be lit probably this week in Washington. Now, Silent Cal did not speak at the ceremony in the first years. In 1927, he wrote out a message which appeared in every major newspaper across the country. A calligrapher embellished it and had it signed by the president. And his speech was this: "Christmas is not a time or a season, but a state of mind. To cherish peace and goodwill, to be plenteous in mercy, is to have the real spirit of Christmas. If we think on these things, there will be born in us a Savior, and over us all will shine a star, sending its gleams of hope to the world." Following the tree lighting ceremony, a choir from Mrs. Coolidge's Congregational Church came to the White House and led in Christmas caroling on the steps that first year. And there were about 10,000 people who showed up on the White House lawn. They each brought a flashlight and a little part from the Evening Star, which had printed the words to the carols that they would be singing that night. The Coolidge's first Christmas at the White House was a happy one. Their two sons were home from school for the holidays, and it was a good time. But then the following summer, 16-year-old Calvin Jr. died because of an infection from a blister on his foot. And the president was devastated, and he said, "When he went, the power and the glory of the presidency went with him." The tradition of the New Year's Day reception continued and was extremely structured. At 11 a.m., members of the cabinet arrived. 11:10, the Chief Justice and Associate Judges. 11:15, Senators and the House of Representatives. 11:35, various organizations filed in. 12 o'clock was lunch. Then at 1 o'clock, the reception of the citizenry began. Thousands of people waited in line to greet the President and First Lady. And in an interview that I had with John Coolidge, he said that his mother's hand became so swollen that her glove had to be cut off. One of the largest crowds that ever came to greet the popular Herbert Hoover was in 1929. And after lunch, 6,300 people filed past the first couple. And while the fire that year that burned the president's office did not stop the New Year's Eve day, the immense crowd did stop the reception. And after this tradition that had been observed for 140 years was discontinued by Herbert Hoover in that first year. Now, as I said, they were very popular, and they received hundreds of Christmas cards poured into the White House. And they tried to acknowledge many of them with a reciprocal card that was printed on one side it was printed by Brewood engravers, and it included the presidential seal. This official-looking card was one of the precursors of another tradition, the official White House Christmas card that finally took root with the Eisenhower administration and continues to this very day. As I was telling someone earlier, when I first interviewed the Eisenhowers, the social secretary handed me an envelope with 38 different cards for their 8 years in office. There was official Christmas cards, there was official enclosure cards, personal cards, contemporary cards. It was a wonderful sight to behold. And FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, and Truman also had one-sided cards, such as the Hoovers did for their Christmas cards. So it was really the Eisenhower that started the first official White House Christmas cards. Another tradition that began to emerge was that of frameable keepsakes that the president gave to his White House staff as gifts. The Hoovers gave personal photographs such as these, but they would also give historical prints from Washington, D.C., of the Washington Monument and then of the South Lawn of the White House and such. Today, young American artists are invited to design for the first families art for their Christmas card. And they would enlarge the same art for the gift to the staff. And so it was not two different things as it was in the earlier years. President and Mrs. Obama are just about ready to release their 2012 official card. probably this week, but this was their last year's 2011 Christmas card, a photograph of the library in the White House. I hope that you have been able to see that the presidents during the Gilded Age of America have not only initiated, but also nurtured many of the traditions that have become the foundation of Christmas, not only in the White House, but also in our homes today. Ron and I wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, one and all. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions today? Yes, sir.
I thought all of the national holidays were created by an act of Congress. You mentioned grants declared Christmas a national holiday. Was that from an act of Congress or executive order? Or has Christmas ever been confirmed?
He probably at least signed the proclamation to make it a federal holiday in 1870. Oh, yes, I have to get that over here. I'm sorry. Okay, yes, he asked if the federal holiday declaration in 1870 was an act of Congress, or if the president just had the initiative to make it so. And it probably, usually, you are right that this was something that came up by Congress, but then signed by the President of the United States. Anyone else?
Question way in the back.
If an average citizen sends a Christmas card to the president, is it returned to the send one in return?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
If the average person sends a card to the president, does he respond?
Good luck. Usually, yes, did you hear that? If an average person sends a Christmas card, will the president reciprocate with a official Christmas card to you? Generally, if you give money to the RNC or the DNC, you have a better chance of receiving an official thank you Christmas card from the president. But, you know, you might have a story to tell that would win their heart, and they would send you one. I told someone just this week, they wanted to know that same question, and I said, try it. But usually it is in the form of a thank you for your helping to get elected or being part of their campaign. But a lot of times it's money. It's how much money you give. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mary, for getting us off to such a great start to the holiday season.